Hey guys, and welcome back to Monster Maze. In my previous video together with Nintendo Black Crisis, we presented a general idea of how a traditional dungeon could work in the sequel to Breath of the Wild, giving sort of an overview of all the different aspects that make a dungeon fun to play through, as well as some of the problems that need to be overcome to make the new mechanics introduced in Breath of the Wild work together with the more traditional game design from the older games. If you haven't watched it yet, I highly recommend that you do check that one out first before moving on, as this one will go a little bit deeper in some of the points I covered in that video. Now this video is going to be a little bit more freeform and less scripted, as I want to try to explain my thought process a bit quicker. So without further ado, let's get into it. In the previous video, you may have noticed a few snippets of this quote-unquote hypothetical dungeon. Now please keep in mind, this is not meant to be a fully realized level by any means. I basically slapped this thing together in a little over 2 days, as you can clearly see from this amazing texture work. Also, architecturally speaking, this place makes very little sense. Like, where would these broken pillars even have been attached to, or what is the purpose of all these moving platforms? It's a video game level, not much else. But aside from the amateuristic look, I did actually think about how you would be moving through this structure, and the various ways that you can restrict a player from progressing too easily, but without taking climbing and paragliding away entirely. One thing to mention up front, and don't quote me on this because I might be completely wrong, but I'm going to guess that the champion abilities like Rivali's Gale are no longer a thing in the sequel. All these abilities were tied to the champion spirits. I mean, you can even see them manifest when you use them. And at the end of the game, we can clearly see that they move on to the afterlife. And honestly, I think removing these abilities from the game would be for the better, as Mipha's Grace alone was pretty OP in my opinion. It's like a fairy, but on steroids. The first thing to note about this dungeon idea is that this outer wall around the dungeon should either not exist or be made unclimbable. That is unfortunately the sacrifice we do have to make this example work, since if it was climbable, you could very easily make your way up. The rocks could simply be too wet and slippery or whatever. I don't actually see anything wrong with restricting climbing on certain surfaces, it's just that in Breath of the Wild it was a little bit inconsistent. Like, why can I climb these ice crystals, which shouldn't provide any grip at all, but I cannot climb these very rough looking walls inside of the Divine Beasts? For the sake of demonstration, I'm actually gonna hide this outer wall for now, as it will make my life a lot easier moving the camera around. As you can see, this dungeon is built around that idea of vertical traversal I talked so much about in the previous video, where a large part of the complexity is derived from how you are going to progress upwards. I like this concept for 2 reasons. One is that it forces you to be observant about your surroundings and study the space around you. And 2, because similar to a dungeon like, say, City in the Sky, it just feels awesome to scale these enormous heights. In real life, I don't really have a fear of heights, but I'm not exactly comfortable with them either, as evident from this clip right here, where I had to shoot footage for a construction company from atop a 70-meter high crane. Let's just say that my legs were shaking a fair bit. This tower design is very reminiscent of the Snowa Temple or the Water Temple, with a central pillar that just goes up and up, accompanied by all these sideway paths leading into other rooms. Obviously, the idea is that you start from the bottom and work your way up gradually. So this right here would be the entrance. First, let's go over the different ways of restricting the player from simply climbing up and reaching the top prematurely. The first and most simple one being the use of an overhang. In Breath of the Wild, if parts of the wall stick out too far horizontally, you won't be able to progress up. Link might be Spider-Man, but even he has his limits. The second one is unclimbable surfaces. As mentioned before, this could be a wall that is either too slippery because of water or ice, or in the case of this example, I used iron bars. If you've ever visited Hyrule Castle's lockup, you might have noticed you won't be able to climb those. The third option would be a surface that actually deals damage and knocks you off if you get into contact with it, which in the case of this example I used spikes. And I think in the previous video I also gave an example of a tile that electrocutes you, for instance. It would kind of depend on the theme of the dungeon, of course. All these methods combined can prevent Link from progressing up way too easily. Every floor has been barred off, so you can only access the parts that you are supposed to. So for instance, when you reach this part right here, you won't be able to use your paraglider to reach this section, hence the spikes, or cheat your way around this platforming section because of the overhang. The idea is that you hop your way from platform to platform, cling onto this one, and then jump to the next one as soon as they align, and boom, you're there. Then you hold on to the other side of this rotating wall to reach the platform on the other side. And then you climb your way up this wall while avoiding these moving spikes to reach this platform right here. And from here you can paraglide down to the next level. Progressing up is again restricted by this overhang and these bars. And from this level you cannot access any other place you haven't already been to. The only way up is to reach the roof of this structure right here. But how? Well, this is what I meant by forcing the player to be observant about their surroundings. When you were still on the bottom floor near the entrance, you might have been able to see that this ledge right here has a gap in it. And by putting 2 and 2 together, you will understand that you can climb around this wall and up to the roof. I put like a rope here, similar to Skyward Sword and Twilight Princess, but honestly this could have been anything. Another bridge or a small stair. This was either me being lazy or wanting to mix it up. And who knows, maybe tightrope walking will become a thing again. From this point the path splits. You can either try to enter this room right here or climb the ladder to the next floor to any of these 3 rooms. Some are barred, some are locked, and honestly this is where I stopped caring how you would exactly progress further. I put some random chests here and there, but this project was already getting out of hand, so they are mostly there for show. Obviously, any of these rooms could hold a combat challenge or a puzzle, like the ones we encountered in the shrines. Oh, and this part right here with the pillars, that's where one of the gameplay options I talked about previously could be used, namely jumping from wall to wall. I actually tested this out in Breath of the Wild, and if the walls are close enough together, it actually is doable. There are some problems with the camera, which automatically tries to center behind Link when he clings to the next wall, and the controls are a bit funky since it doesn't matter from which perspective you are looking at the situation, you always have to press down and jump to perform this move, which is a bit counterintuitive. However, they could simply fix this with a new input, perhaps pressing the jump button twice in rapid succession to perform a wall jump. Just spitballing here. From this point I really have nowhere else to go in terms of progression, so let's talk about something I haven't touched upon as of yet: dungeon items. As you might have noticed from my previous video, I love me some hookshot. Just the idea that you can paraglide around and target a wall, pull yourself towards it, is just amazing to me. I do realize that if the hookshot is implemented, this whole vertical design pretty much goes out the window. As from that point on, there's little ways to go but linear maze-like room-to-room dungeon design, as anything with a vertical design like this would be completely destroyed by the ability to target any wall or object. So if anything, this should either be one of the last items to be introduced in the game, or the surfaces that you are allowed to target are a little bit more limited. In my first video I used Just Cause as an example, but I imagine that there are so many more cool items that could be introduced in Breath of the Wild 2. So in that case, let's have a little brainstorming session together. Sound off in the comments below if you have a cool idea regarding an item, old or new, that could make it into Breath of the Wild 2. And who knows, I might even compile them and include them in a future video. With that said, I think I have reached a point where you all get the idea. The sequel to Breath of the Wild has a lot of potential and a lot of options when it comes to integrating the traditional dungeon design. I'm pretty sure that speedrunners will have a field day with a dungeon idea like the one I just presented and completely break it on every conceivable level, as they have done so many times in the past games. In the next episode, we are going to switch gears a bit and look at something else: the Lome labyrinths found in Breath of the Wild, and see if these structures could potentially make a return in the next game, as well as analyzing their architecture. I hope you look forward to it. I was actually planning to do a 100 subscriber milestone mention in this video, but by this point I already surpassed 300 subscribers, so I'm gonna save it for the 1000 milestone. Thank you all so very much for your support. I never expected my video to do so well. If you want to support me, all you need to do is subscribe to the channel, and if you're feeling even more generous, leave a like on the video. This is Don signing off, and have a good one. Aw man, it's raining again? I am not paying money for a bed so I can skip the time. What? Don't worry, it's perfectly safe. Oh. Whoops.